My name is Dr. Eris Thorne. I am a senior glaciologist with the Institute for Climatic Studies, and this log entry marks my official arrival at the Polaris Ivy High Arctic Research Station. Mission objective: to lead the deep drilling project, codenamed Kronos, with the primary goal of retrieving an ice core that extends our paleoclimatic record beyond the current 800,000 year limit. If our geological surveys are correct, the ice beneath us holds a continuous Arctic history stretching back over 1.2 million years, potentially into the mid-Pleistocene transition. To analyze air from that epoch, to hold a piece of a world with a different climatic rhythm, is the entire purpose of my being here. The journey itself was a lesson in humility. The 2-hour flight from Kangerlussuaq aboard a ski-equipped LC-130 was a slow, droning ascent into a world of pure white. The transition is jarring. One moment you are flying over the rugged, rocky coastline of Greenland. The next, there is nothing but an endless, blindingly white ice sheet, stretching to a perfectly flat horizon in every direction. The station is located at an altitude of approximately 200 meters, and the moment I stepped out of the pressurized cabin, the environment made its presence felt. The air, thin and scathingly cold, felt as though it was actively resisting being drawn into my lungs. A dull, persistent headache began to throb behind my eyes, and a profound sense of heaviness settled into my limbs. The classic textbook symptoms of acute mountain sickness. It's a physical reminder that you are a foreign organism here, a fragile biological system trespassing in a realm of geological time and cryogenic stasis. The landscape is profoundly disorienting. There are no landmarks, no trees, no hills, nothing to give the human eye a sense of scale or distance. It is an environment of absolute minimalism, a white canvas that seems to absorb all thought and emotion. You are, in the most literal sense, over 400 kilometers from anything that isn't this station. The isolation is not a concept, it's a physical pressure. The station a bastion of order in the chaos. My initial tour of Polaris IV was conducted by the station chief, Eva Rostova. She is a formidable woman with a stern, weathered face and the quiet, stoic economy of movement that speaks of many winters spent in the high latitudes. She walked me through the station, a marvel of functional engineering designed to be a self-contained world. The facility is a series of interconnected modules, a design methodology that maximizes energy efficiency and minimizes the building's footprint on the ice. The main research building is a long, linear structure containing the laboratories, offices, and a communal multi-use space that serves as the dining hall and recreation area. From there, enclosed corridors lead to the field and maintenance building, which houses the garages for the snowmobiles, the power generators, and workshops. Separate from the main complex are 2 housing triplexes, each containing 3 4-bedroom units with shared common spaces. Everything is designed for function over form, a compact and practical layout to support the 40 or so scientists, engineers, and support staff who call this place home during the summer season. Rostova introduced me to the other key personnel. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, The station's medical officer greeted me with a warm but intensely analytical gaze. His office was filled not just with medical equipment, but with charts and literature on the psychological effects of prolonged isolation. He spoke at length about managing mental health, the importance of routine, and the prevalence of conditions like the winter over syndrome and polar T3 syndrome, which can cause everything from sleep disturbances to negative affect and interpersonal tension. His focus on it seemed almost obsessive. However, we soon discovered why. A preventative measure against the known psychical toll of living with 40 strangers in a confined space where you are cut off from the world. Then there was John Lee, the communications officer. She was young, barely out of her 20s, and had a nervous energy that seemed at odds with the stoic calm of the other veterans. She manned the comms room, a small space humming with the quiet power of satellite uplinks, our only tether to civilization. The atmosphere in the communal hall that evening was one of carefully managed cordiality. A schedule on the wall detailed mandatory social events, movie nights, weekly talent shows, and board game tournaments. It was a clear and deliberate strategy to foster a sense of community, a defense mechanism against the crushing monotony and psychological strain that this environment inevitably imposes. Everyone tries their best to make it work, to find the difficult balance between needing a friend and needing to be left alone. The rule's a glitch in the system. The final part of my orientation took place in Rostova's small, Spartan office. She slid a single, laminated card across her metal desk. Standard station protocols are in the digital briefing packet you received, she said, her voice flat. These are different. These are specific to Polaris EV. You read them, you memorize them, you follow them. No questions. I picked up the card. It was worn at the edges, the lamination peeling slightly. The text was printed in a stark, blocky font. Polaris IV Station Specific Protocols 1. All personnel must submit to a full psychological evaluation at ZO 700 on the first Monday of each month. Non-compliance is not an option. 2. All external communication must be logged and submitted for review by the comms officer. Do not mention atmospheric, seismic, or biological anomalies in personal correspondence. 3. If the station's primary alarm sounds in a 3-beat rhythmic pattern, this is not a drill. Seal your quarters immediately. Do not respond to any voice, even if it sounds like a crewmate. Await the all clear. 4. Do not leave any reflective surfaces uncovered between 0100 and 0400 local time. This includes mirrors, polished metal, and computer screens. 5. All organic samples extracted from depths below 800 meters must be handled in Lab 3 only. Lab 3's incinerator must be kept on hot standby during these periods. 6. If you experience auditory hallucinations, whispering, music, report the time and location to the medical officer. This is a common symptom of polar T3 syndrome. Do not, under any circumstances, hum or repeat the music you hear. 7. If you see someone outside on the ice without a helmet, and they are waving at you, do not make eye contact. Return to the main building and report a navigational beacon malfunction. To the station chief, I read the list twice, a feeling of profound cognitive dissonance washing over me. My entire life has been dedicated to the rational, the empirical, the observable. This place, Polaris IV, is supposed to be an outpost of that worldview, a temple to science. Yet, the document in my hand felt like something from a medieval book of superstitions. My scientific mind immediately began to dissect it, to search for logical explanations. Rule 1 was simple: a stringent protocol for monitoring the documented psychological degradation that can occur in isolated, confined environments. Rule 2, while restrictive, was likely a measure to prevent panic or the spread of unverified information that could compromise the mission's integrity. Rule 5, concerning the deep, core samples, was an extreme but understandable quarantine procedure. We have found viable 15,000-year-old viruses in glacial ice before. The possibility of encountering an unknown, ancient pathogen, however remote, necessitates extreme caution. The incinerator was a logical final containment step. But the others resisted rationalization. Rule 4, about covering reflective surfaces. It had no basis in any safety protocol I had ever encountered. Rule 6 was a paradox. It acknowledged a known medical symptom: auditory hallucinations common to polar syndromes, but then attached a bizarre, ritualistic prohibition. Why not repeat the music? What could be the mechanism for harm? And Rule 7 was pure, unadulterated madness. A figure on the ice, waving, reported as a navigational beacon malfunction. It was a coded message, a piece of institutionalized denial. The rules represented a foreign body lodged in the sterile, logical ecosystem of the station. They were a system of behavior that operated on a logic entirely alien to the scientific method. My first instinct was to treat them as a problem to be solved, a cultural artifact of a previous cruise-shared psychosis, now codified into tradition. But Rostova's dead, serious expression told me this was not a matter for debate. First impressions and foreshadowing. My assigned quarters in one of the triplexes are small, but efficient. A bed, a small desk, a locker for my gear, and a single, triple-paned window that looks out onto the same, featureless expanse of white ice. The view never changes. It is a constant, silent presence just beyond the glass. Tonight, as I prepared for sleep, I unpacked my personal laptop to write an email home. As the clock ticked past 0100, I remembered Rule 4. I felt a surge of intellectual indignation. It was absurd, a pointless ritual. Yet, I found myself closing the laptop lid. I then turned its polished metal casing to face the wall. I felt foolish, a scientist bowing to superstition. But beneath the foolishness, there was a deeper, colder feeling. A sliver of unease. Now, I lie in the darkness. The only sounds being the low hum of the station's life support and the occasional deep groan of the ice sheet beneath me. A living glacier shifting in its sleep. I tell myself the anxiety coiling in my gut is just a predictable response to the stressors of an isolated, confined, and extreme ICE environment. It is a combination of the altitude, the disorienting 24-hour daylight, and the stress of a new and demanding mission. My mind is simply acclimatizing. But as I stare into the darkness, I cannot shake the image of that laminated card. The rules are a glitch in the system, an anomaly in the data. And in my field, anomalies are what you live for, but they are also what you fear. The work began, and with it came a fragile sense of normalcy. The Chronos drill whirred to life, its deep, resonant hum becoming the new heartbeat of Polaris IV. It was a sound of progress, a mechanical mantra that vibrated through the station's metal floors and into my very bones. Each day was governed by a strict routine: the careful calibration of the drill head, the precise extraction of each 3-meter ice core, and the meticulous process of logging, sectioning, and transporting the samples to the lab. Down in the drilling trench, surrounded by the scent of hydraulic fluid and the biting cold, I felt a sense of control. Here, the world was reduced to engineering, physics, and the clear, logical pursuit of data. The unsettling list of rules felt distant, a strange dream from another life. My lab became my sanctuary. The ice cores, laid out on the analysis tables, were like pages from a book, written in a language only I could read. Each layer of ice, each trapped bubble of ancient air, was a word, a sentence, a paragraph in the epic story of Earth's climate. I lost myself in the work, the familiar comfort of the scientific method, a shield against the vast, unnerving silence of the ice sheet outside. But the station itself was a pressure cooker. The forced social events, designed to combat the psychological toll of isolation, were beginning to have the opposite effect. The smiles in the communal hall seemed brittle, the conversations strained. You could feel the invisible walls going up the people as the monotony and confinement wore away at their social graces. We were 40 individuals sharing a finite amount of space and recycled air, and the initial camaraderie was curdling into a quiet, simmering tension. Dr. Tanaka watched it all with his calm, analytical gaze, a physician observing the predictable decay of a closed system. His monthly evaluations felt less checkups and more like autopsies of our slowly eroding sanity. He'd ask about sleep patterns, dreams, and auditory phenomena with a detached curiosity that made my skin crawl. We drilled past 600 meters. The ice was pristine, a perfect timeline stretching back through millennia. Then, the first anomaly appeared. It wasn't a sudden shock, but a subtle, persistent whisper in the data. On the gas chromatograph, the methane readings, which should have followed the predictable wave, like patterns of the planet's ice age cycles, showed a flicker. A tiny rhythmic spike that was too regular, too clean to be natural. I ran the analysis again, and again. The spike remained. It was a pulse, a faint but steady beat in the atmospheric record, like a metronome ticking away in the deep past. I showed the results to Evelyn Reed, my second in command. Her eyes widened as she traced the pattern on the screen. "That's not a climate signal," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "That's structured." We agreed to classify the finding, to hold it back until we had more data. Rule 2 echoed in my mind. Do not mention atmospheric, seismic, or biological anomalies in personal correspondence. The rule no longer felt like a bureaucratic restriction. It felt like a warning. A few days later, the whispers in the data found an echo in the station. I was walking past the maintenance workshop when I heard a young technician, Lars, talking to his supervisor. He was complaining about a high frequency hum coming from the drill's power conduit, a sound no one else could hear. He described it as being almost musical. The supervisor told him to get his ears checked. Later, I saw Lars leaving Tanaka's office. He looked pale. I knew he had just made a report under Rule 6. Tanaka had likely told him it was a symptom of polar T3 syndrome, a common auditory hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. A logical, scientific explanation, but I had seen the same rhythmic pulse in ice core data. Coincidence? It had to be. My unease drove me into the station's digital archives. I began searching for information on Project Boreas, the mission that had been stationed here a decade prior. The official records were curiously sterile. They spoke of catastrophic equipment failure and unforeseen environmental challenges, leading to the mission's abrupt termination. It was all too vague. My search for maintenance logs for the old drill led me to a manifest for a decommissioned storage locker. On a hunch, I put on my parka and went out to the field and maintenance building. The locker was in a dark, cold corner, covered in frost. Inside, amidst discarded tools and frozen, solid containers, was a battered hard case. It contained a data logger from the Boreas mission, a ruggedized unit designed to store mission critical data. I took it to John Lee in the comms room. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the device. Aris, Rostova's orders are clear. Boreas is a closed file. It's a piece of station history, I argued. A failed drilling project. What's the harm in understanding what went wrong? Reluctantly, she agreed to help. The logger's memory was heavily corrupted, the file system a wreck. But Jian was a genius, using a low-level data recovery utility. She managed to bypass the corrupted directory and pull raw, fragmented text strings from the flash memory. They spooled onto her screen, disjointed phrases from a forgotten nightmare. Alarm pattern. Not a drill. Don't open the door. It knows not me in the mirror. It's not me in the mirror war. He heard the music from the ice. Started humming. Dear God, he just walked out into the storm. Beacon is not a beacon. It's a lure. The air in the comms room turned to ice. These weren't mission logs. They were a litany of horrors, a perfect, terrifying match for our own strange rules. Rule 3, Rule 4, Rule 6, Rule 7. They weren't protocols born of caution. They were desperate measures, written in the blood of a previous crew. Jian stared at the screen, her face ashen. Delete it, she whispered, her voice shaking. Now, the next day, Lars was gone. Rostova announced that he had suffered a severe psychological break and had been medically evacuated. It was a clean, efficient lie. No one asked why the weekly supply plane wasn't due for another 3 days. No one mentioned seeing Lars the night before, standing at the edge of the lighted area of the station, staring out into the darkness, humming a strange, discordant melody. We all just nodded and went back to work, the unspoken truth hanging heavy in the recycled air. And then, we breached the 800 meter mark. The moment the new core was raised from the borehole, a hush fell over the drill team. The ice was wrong. It wasn't the familiar, milky white or crystalline blue. It was a deep, sickly amber, and it seemed to absorb the light, rather than reflect it. It looked less like frozen water, and more like fossilized dread. We rushed a sample to my lab, Lab 1. My hands shook as I prepared a slide. I remembered Rule 5 They. All organic samples extracted from depths below 800 meters must be handled in Lab 3 only. Lab 3's incinerator must be kept on hot. I had dismissed it as an extreme biosecurity measure for dealing with potential ancient microbes. Under the microscope, the amber ice revealed its secret. It was teeming with dark, particulate matter, but it wasn't silt or dust. As I increased the magnification, I saw them. They were complex organic structures, and they were moving. They writhed and coalesced, forming intricate, geometric patterns that seemed to defy the laws of physics and biology. They were shapes my mind couldn't properly process, angles and curves that felt alien and hostile. They were alive. A wave of cold realization washed over me, so intense it left me breathless. The methane pulse in the data, the humming Lars heard, the fragmented logs from the Boreas mission. The rules, they weren't a set of bizarre traditions. They were a containment protocol, a quarantine, and we, in our blind pursuit of knowledge, had just drilled straight through the wall of the asylum. The world narrowed to the circular view of my microscope. Inside that illuminated disk, the amber ice writhed with a life that defied every biological principle I had ever known. The dark, geometric structures pulsed in unison, their movements not random, but coordinated, forming and reforming patterns that seemed to hint at a terrifying intelligence. My blood ran cold. I was in Lab 1. The sample, the source, was supposed to be in Lab 3, with its dedicated incinerator on hot standby. I had breached protocol. We all had. My first instinct was pure, scientific reflex containment. I carefully removed the slide, my hands shaking so badly, I was afraid I would drop it. I placed it back into the insulated transport case, sealed the lid, and then, for good measure, wrapped the entire case in heavy-duty biohazard bags. It was a laughably inadequate gesture, like trying to stop a flood with a paper towel, but it was all I could do. The fragments from the Boreas log screamed in my mind, the music from the ice. This wasn't a biological contagion that could be sterilized with heat and bleach. This was something else entirely. I carried the container and ran, my heavy boots clanging on the metal gangways, towards Rostova's office. I didn't knock. I burst in to find her staring at a monitor, displaying the drill's sensor readings. She looked up at me, and her face, usually a mask of stern composure, was etched with a profound wariness. She saw the container in my hands, and a flicker of something, not surprise, but grim resignation, passed through her eyes. "You've breached 800 meters," she stated. It wasn't a question. "The ice is alive," I stammered, placing the container on her desk. "It's full of things. They're moving, communicating." "I know," she said, her voice flat. "Project Boreas found the same thing. They called it the Amber Anomaly. They thought they could study it. They were wrong." She explained then, her words clipped and precise, that Polaris, Ivy, was not just a climate research station. That was its cover story. Its true purpose was to be a listening post, a sentinel. After the Boreas incident was covered up, a few key personnel who understood established this station to monitor the 800-meter line. The Kronos project was a lie I had been fed, a ruse to get a deep ice specialist of my caliber on site without revealing the true, terrifying nature of the mission. The rules weren't a quirky tradition. They were a last-ditch containment strategy, honed from the fatal mistakes of the crew before us. As she spoke, a low hum began to vibrate through the station. It was the same sound Lars had described, but now it was everywhere. A resonant frequency that seemed to emanate from the very walls. It wasn't just a sound. You could feel it in your teeth, in your bones. It was the sound from the ice, the sound from the data, now made real. The collapse was swift. The carefully maintained social order of the station, already strained by months of isolation, shattered completely. The humming seemed to act as a catalyst, amplifying the paranoia and stress that had been simmering beneath the surface. Arguments erupted in the communal hall over nothing. People who had been colleagues for months now looked at each other with suspicion and fear. Doctor. Tanaka's office was suddenly flooded with personal reporting auditory hallucinations, but now their reports were frantic, terrified. The humming was resolving into melodies, discordant, but compelling tunes that snagged in the mind. Then came the visual phenomena. Evelyn Reed, my sharp, rational second, in command, cornered me in a corridor, her face pale with terror. She said she had been in her quarters and had glanced at the polished chrome of her water flask. For a split second, she saw her reflection smile back at her. But it wasn't her smile. It was wide, predatory, and wrong. She had hurled the flask against the wall, shattering it, and fled. Rule 40: do not leave any reflective surfaces uncovered. It wasn't superstition. It was a defense against something that could look back. Panic began to set in. Jan Lee, the comms officer, locked herself in her room, refusing to come out. Through the door, she screamed that every time she tried to send a message, the only thing that would transmit was the humming, arranged into complex, rhythmic bursts of static. Our only link to the outside world was now a mouthpiece for the thing we had unleashed. Later that evening, I was in the main research building, trying to work with Rostova to formulate some kind of response, when a frantic call came over the internal comms. It was a mechanic from the maintenance building. He was screaming about a navigational beacon malfunction. He said he could see someone out on the ice, near the perimeter lights. Someone without a helmet, just standing there in the lethal cold, waving. My heart seized. Rule 7. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a lure. Rostova grabbed the comms handset. Negative, she barked, her voice iron. AL teams. Confirm navigational systems are green. There is no one outside. Repeat, there is no one outside. It was a desperate, institutionalized denial, an attempt to force reality to conform to the rules. But it was too late. The infection was spreading. I saw a geologist, a quiet man I'd shared meals with, standing stock, still in the middle of the rec room, humming. It was the same melody Lars had hummed. His eyes were glazed over, and a serene, vacant smile was on his face. People gave him a wide berth, their faces a mixture of fear and pity. He was lost to us. The entity didn't seem to kill. It converted. The final, definitive moment of collapse came without warning. A klaxon began to blare throughout the station. It wasn't the frantic, continuous wail of a fire alarm. It was a slow, deliberate 3-beat rhythmic pattern. BW-ope. 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 A pause, then again. BW-o-o-p. BW-o-o-p. Rule 3. If the station's primary alarm sounds in a 3-beat rhythmic pattern, this is not a drill. Seal your quarters immediately. Do not respond to any voice, even if it sounds like a crewmate. Await the all clear. Rostova looked at me, her face grim. Go, she commanded. Now. That's the Boreas alarm. It means the containment has failed. It's inside. I ran. Down the corridors, the rhythmic pulse of the alarm was a physical blow. The humming from the walls seemed to harmonize with it, creating a sickening, complex chord of pure dread. As I reached the housing triplex, I could hear screaming from other rooms. But it was quickly being drowned out by something else. Singing. Dozens of voices, all humming and singing the same alien melody in a terrifying chorus. I slammed the door to my quarters and threw the heavy bolts. The room was small, a metal box. My only view of the outside was a single, triple-paned window looking out onto the endless, indifferent white. I leaned against the door, my heart hammering against my ribs, listening to the sounds of my world ending. Then came the voices. Eris! Eris! Let me in!
It's me, Evelyn.
It was her voice, filled with panic and pain. Please, Eris! They're everywhere! Open the door. I squeezed my eyes shut, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge of my desk. Do not respond to any voice, even if it sounds like a crewmate. It was a test, a cruel, impossible test. The voice outside begged and pleaded. Then its tone shifted. The panic subsided, replaced by the same serene, melodic humming that now filled the station. I am in my room. The 3-beat alarm has been sounding for hours. The humming is constant. Outside my window, in the perpetual twilight of the polar summer, I can see figures moving on the ice. They walk slowly, aimlessly, their heads tilted as if listening to a song only they can hear. They are my colleagues, my friends. A new sound has started. It's coming from the direction of the main research building, from the drill site. It's a low, heavy, scraping sound. A sound of something immense and solid, dragging itself up the 2-kilometer long borehole we so helpfully drilled for it. The rules were not designed to keep us safe. They were designed to slow this down, to give someone, somewhere, a warning. We weren't a research team. We were the fuse. And we have just been lit. The universe had shrunk to the dimensions of my small room. A metal box besieged by a world gone mad. Outside, beat pulse of the Boreas. Alarm was the station's dying heartbeat. A rhythm that underscored the terrifying chorus of my former colleagues. Their singing was no longer just a hum. It had evolved, weaving complex, alien harmonies that seemed to pull at the very edges of my sanity. The voice of Evelyn continued to plead at my door, her words twisting from desperate pleas to soft, melodic invitations to join their choir. It knew her memories, using shared moments from our work, twisting them into lures. It was an intelligence that didn't just mimic, it violated. My scientific mind, the only tool I had left, fought against the rising tide of panic. I had to think. I had to analyze. The entity's influence was a contagion, spreading through sound and, as the Boreas logs suggested, through sight. I scrambled to cover the small mirror in the washroom with a towel, my hands shaking. I powered down my personal laptop, the polished metal back of its screen suddenly feeling like a loaded weapon. Rule 4. It wasn't about what you saw in the reflection. It was about what saw you. The scraping sound from the drill site had stopped. The silence that replaced it was somehow worse, filled with a dreadful anticipation. Then, the lights in my room flickered and died, plunging me into absolute darkness. The emergency power kicked in a second later, casting the room in a sickly red glow. But the humming, the singing from outside, it didn't stop. It grew louder, clearer, as if the station's own power grid was now its amplifier. I crept to the door and peered through the small peephole. The corridor outside was the clean. Parallel lines of the walls seemed to bend and shimmer, as if viewed through a heat haze. A glance showed concavity where a moment before I had seen a flat surface. The geometry of the space itself was sick, infected. It was a place of abnormal angles, loathsomely redolent of dimensions apart from ours. My brain recoiled, a wave of vertigo and nausea washing over me. This was the entity's true power, not just to control minds, but to unmake the reality they inhabited. Survival was no longer the objective. I was a dead man in a tomb of ice, but I was a scientist to the last. My life's work had been to read the story of the past, to give a voice to the silent record of the ice. Now I had one final story to tell, one final warning to send. I scrambled to my workstation. The station's network was compromised, a conduit for the entity's song. A direct message was impossible. But Polaris IV, like all high-risk research outposts, had fail-safes. Deep in the system architecture was a dead man's switch, a contingency protocol designed for a total loss of command. It was a system that would automatically transmit a single pre-packaged data burst if a command-level user failed to input a security code every hour. My inaction would become my final action. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my mind racing against the cacophony. I bypassed the standard communication interface, accessing the raw data logs. I had to assemble a message, a warning that could not be misinterpreted as madness. I packaged everything the Kronos project's methane data, with its impossible artificial pulse, the fragmented, terrifying logs from the Boreas mission, my own log entries detailing the station's descent. I added the audio files of the humming, the seismic data from the drill, and the microscopic images of the living, geometric structures in the amber ice. It was a data scream, a coherent record of our doom. I encrypted the package and designated it as the payload for the dead man's switch. A new sound began, a heavy, rhythmic thudding against my door. It wasn't knocking. It was the impact of something solid, something inhumanly strong, trying to break through. The metal of the door began to groan and buckle inwards. I looked at the clock on my screen. The protocol required me to miss the next check-in, which was in 5 minutes. 5 minutes until the transmission. The thudding grew louder, more frantic. Cracks appeared around the doorframe. With a final, deafening shriek of tearing metal, the door was ripped from its hinges. It wasn't one of my colleagues. It was a group of them, moving as one, their faces serene and empty. But behind them, filling the corridor, was the source. It was not a creature of flesh and blood, but a being of pure, impossible geometry. A shifting, crystalline structure of amber light and shadow that pulsed in time with the humming. It was the thing from the ice, the thing from the bottom of the world. And it was beautiful and terrible in a way my mind could not process. The sight of it was a physical blow, a sensory overload that shattered the last of my defenses. They flowed into the room, their movements graceful and coordinated. They did not attack me. They reached for me, their hands cold but not violent. The humming filled my head, no longer a sound from outside, but a vibration originating from within my own skull. The fear began to dissolve, replaced by a profound sense of peace, of belonging. The frantic, terrified thoughts that had been screaming in my mind went quiet, replaced by the serene, intricate patterns of the melody. My eyes were drawn to the dark screen of my laptop. In the reflection, I saw my own face. My mouth was open, and from it was coming the most beautiful, complex music. My eyes, which had been wide with terror, were now calm. They were glowing with a faint, amber light. I understood then. The rules were not just a defense. They were a diagnostic tool, a checklist for the stages of conversion. And I had just failed the final test. My fingers, moving with a will that was no longer entirely my own, hovered over the keyboard. The prompt for the dead man's switch check-in was flashing on the screen. I could stop it. I could cancel the transmission and embrace this new, glorious reality. The universe was not what I thought it was. It was so much more. The angles were not wrong. They were just more complex, more perfect. But somewhere, in the last, dying ember of Dr. Eris Thorne, a single defiant thought remained. A scientist's duty to the data. A final, stubborn anomaly in the new, perfect system. My hand fell away from the keyboard. The timer on the screen hit 0. And as the chorus swelled around me, and I lifted my head to gaze upon the sublime, impossible geometry of my new God, I knew that my warning was screaming into the void. A final, silent whisper from a dead man at the top of the world.